everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yeah, it's just our weekly voyage of discovery in the world of books. And today, we are going to be starting out with 2024 with a brand new book by a wonderful writer named Eric Weintraub. Now, Eric comes to us from Los Angeles, California, and his book is a very, very fascinating historical fiction book called South of Sepharad, and it deals with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain back in 1492. And 1492 was a big year for a lot that went on in the world as well as in Spain, and Eric's going to be telling us all about what went on over there. And we're going to find out some fascinating details about the situation regarding the Jews as well as the Muslims living over in Spain. We're going to be learning, he's going to be telling us all about the trek they had to make from Granada, which was the last holdout of the Muslim Empire, down to the coast. They had to get to Morocco, Fez, to be honest with you. We're going interior a little bit. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the Inquisition. So a couple of you might feel a little squeamish as we talk about the Inquisition. That doesn't bother me. I didn't think it was terribly offensive, but we do talk about a little bit about that horrible time when people were put to the stake and were questioned about their beliefs, because that's part of this whole story. We learn about the Jewish people, what were called the conversos, or the conversions to Catholicism, and was that conversion legitimate? Okay, and that's one of the big things we go through here. This is a fascinating story about a fascinating family in there. The research is both well done, and it's also very difficult to find. There's not a lot written about this during that time period, and so the work he's had to do is exemplary on this book. I loved it when I started reading it. Another one brought to us by History Through Fiction Publishing. My friend Colin Mustful over there, wonderful, wonderful books he puts out. So this is a read I think you're really going to enjoy. So you know what? Why don't I just stop talking right now, and let's hook up with Eric Weintraub out there in sunny Southern California. Eric, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Eric, first of all, is it sunny out there today? That's the question.
It is sunny. We actually had a lot of rain this week, so we're happy to have the sun back.
Great. My daughter is heading out there in February, and I said, it's possible you could get some rain in February. That's a typical time for that. But she's going out to a Pokemon Go festival, and where they will tread around all of Los Angeles with their phones trying to collect Pokemons. She loves it. It gets a lot of good exercise for that, so she'll be coming out your way. Anyway, Eric, your new book, your book called South of Sepharad. Am I pronouncing that properly, Sepharad?
That's correct.
Okay. South of Sepharad. Tell us, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you go to college? Did you take any courses in history or creative writing? Because you did a lot of really great historical research in that. So I'm wondering, where did you get all this from?
Oh, thank you for that. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I went to college at USC for my undergrad and Mount St. Mary's University, where I got an MFA in creative writing. I've been lucky to do a lot of creative writing courses and work with a lot of really wonderful authors who've been great mentors to me. And actually, in terms of history, I didn't take as many history classes. I always had a real love and fascination with history, which I say came from mostly reading books and watching movies. But I always felt that history classes, often the ones that I had, they were teaching to the test. They were very much like, you must memorize this date or this small incident that happened. And I never had a lot of interest in it. And it wasn't really until I started hearing about this story, like the expulsion of the Jews, and really wanting to learn more about particular moments in history, that I had to sort of take it upon myself to go and research this independently, because this wasn't the kind of story that I was going to learn in a classroom.
Okay. All right. Now, but in addition to writing this book, you have another job, if I'm not mistaken, that also requires you to do a little bit of writing. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes. So I do communications and marketing work at a USC in the eye care department. And basically, I wear many hats there, but one of the big things I do is I write about complex eye care medical cases that our doctors are doing to treat really the most complex cases in the country. And I write about how they've figured out how to treat these cases, how they work with the patients, how the patients are recovered, and doing all that. I don't have a medical background either, but through speaking with them and interviewing them, sort of in the way that you're interviewing me right now, I'm able to learn about this specialty so that I can share it with the community in the hopes that other people who are suffering from these eye care diseases are able to know that they can come to USC for help and get the treatment they need.
Okay. And that's a full-time position? You're working that full-time?
Full-time position, 40 hours a week.
Wow. Where do you find time to write then?
The most consistent time is I write on my lunch break. I will go out of the office for an hour and go write somewhere. Luckily, our USC campus has a wonderful library that I'm able to write in. And then, when I can get time on nights and weekends, I do that too. It's a lot of commitment, but I love doing it.
Good. Well, I'm very glad you did it. I'll tell you what. Your book, South of Sepharad, takes place in 1492. Now, I know 1492 because that's when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But some other things are going on in that year. What was happening in Spain in 1492? Fill us in.
So 1492 was such a banner year for Spain that there's so much happening just in addition to Columbus. So probably the most several significant things, really. So the Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had been on a basically 10-year military campaign to what they call reconquer the Iberian Peninsula, so take it back from Muslim rule. And the last place on the peninsula that was under Muslim rule was actually Granada, Spain, where the book takes place. And at the beginning of 1492, the Emir of Granada finally surrendered, and Isabel and Ferdinand were able to take Granada, and they had considered that the reconquering of the peninsula and would soon turn into the Spanish Empire, which is really the Spain that we know today. On top of that, there was the Spanish Inquisition, which had begun in 1474, but was ramping up at this time, which was done to figure out if Jews who had converted to Christianity were still practicing their Judaism in private. And on top of all this, there was also the issuing of what's called the Alhambra Decree, which plays a major role in this book, which was a decree that Isabel and Ferdinand handed down, saying that they were going to expel all the Jews from the new Spanish kingdoms.
Jeez, that was a lot. Now, when we say Iberian Peninsula, I also think, is Portugal part of that? Or was that separate?
So technically, yeah, I'd say Portugal is part of the Iberian Peninsula, and it's so strange that Isabel and Ferdinand never attempted to conquer Portugal. I believe they have good relationships with them. One of their daughters married the King of Portugal a few years after 1492. So yes, when I talk about the Iberian Peninsula in this conversation, I'm mostly talking about what we know as the country of Spain that exists today.
Okay, now, again, friends, this book is published through History Through Fiction Publishers, a wonderful publishing company. And I can tell you what, unless you did great historical research, you're not getting published by those people. And that's what this book has, great research. So tell us a little bit about, where did you get all these information, these stories? Where did you find everything, Eric? I mean, 1492, that's a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, and it made it very difficult to research at times. I actually did not even know the story of the expulsion until I was 25 years old. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was studying abroad in Granada, and I went to visit her over the holiday weekend. And on January 2nd, we were walking around, and we encountered this parade, and I didn't know what it was for. And she told me that they were celebrating the end of the Reconquest, which the Emir officially surrendered on January 2nd, 1492. And then she told me that shortly afterward, Spain decided to expel all its Muslims and its Jews. And I was really surprised because I'd never heard this story before. I was familiar with the Spanish Inquisition, had a passing understanding of it, but had never heard even such a specific detail. So I was really curious to learn more. And the first thing I did was I looked for, because I love novels and literature, I decided I'd start by looking for novels on the subject. And lo and behold, there's very, very little literature on the subject, at least published in English. In all the years I've been researching this, I found very few novels that are like mine. And so I still really wanted to learn about this, so I turned to history books and was able to find some really great books on the topic. Started there. I looked for primary resources. I was hoping I could maybe find something such as a diary from someone from the generation of Jews who was expelled from Spain, and really came across virtually nothing, because if anything does exist, again, it would be 500 years old. It hasn't been widely published, or it was also extremely dangerous to keep such a diary. You only have 3 months to flee Spain before the Alhambra Decree goes into effect. And if you're staying as a converted Jew, which was the other option you could have with the Alhambra Decrees, stay in Spain by converting to Christianity, you definitely could not keep a diary about what it was like to be a converted Jew or practicing in private. So that made it very difficult. I was lucky towards the end of my research. There's a very renowned historian who lives in Los Angeles and actually works at UCLA named Teofilo Ruiz. And I was able to meet him, and he was actually able to give me some information about the time period, little details even, not so much even about the expulsion, but just the way Spanish life was in the 1400s. And so it was through all these things that I was beginning to form this picture of 1492 Spain.
Right. Wow. Well, it's interesting because, I had heard about the expulsion of the Moors. I mean, that's something I've heard. Oh, they got the Muslims out of the area, got them all out. But I never heard about this. Why do you think that is, that we have not heard more about the total expulsion of not just the Moors, but also the Jews? Why do you think that story is not being out there?
I'm not sure, and I would love to read a novel about the expulsion of the Muslims as well. There aren't too many out there either. So if we've heard more about the expulsion of the Muslims, it's because the Muslims were the ruling class of the Iberian Peninsula for about 700, 800 years. They even had the Cordoba Caliphate for a long time. So, and Jews more so just lived there. They might have held some high positions, but they were not kings or emirs or things like that. Also, the expulsion of the Muslims was much more prolonged, and in ways, it's a much more, even as violent and tragic as the story of the expulsion of the Jews is, the expulsion of the Muslims is even more tragic, or certainly more violent. So the Jews had about really 3 months to leave, but they tried to forcibly convert the Muslims. The Muslims tried to resist and revolt. So there were wars, battles. It's actually a very long story. And perhaps we've heard more about that just because we know how large the Muslim empire was in the 1400s. And I would say I feel like there's so much more to learn about both of them, but perhaps that might be why the expulsion of the Muslims might be a little more familiar to people than the expulsion of the Jews.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the points that's made through the book is that the Jews had lived there for almost 1,500 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then under this, it's the Alhambra Decree by Ferdinand and Isabella, they're given, 3 months to get out of Dodge?
Basically, they were told that you need to leave by July 31st, 1492. That was the original cutoff date that they gave them. And even though the Alhambra Decree was signed on March 31st, 1492, but actually, this is back in the 1400s where news traveled slowly. So actually, a lot of times the Jews would find out about it with maybe a month or a couple weeks left before they had to get out of there.
And Granada was the key. They had to get that. If they didn't, that was the solidification of that entire peninsula then. And your book deals with the expulsion from Granada. Had they been expelled from other areas in Spain? I don't have any earthly idea.
Actually, yes. So there was a large massacre in Barcelona of Jews in 1391, and that forced there was a lot of forced conversion besides expulsion that forced the Jews to convert. I believe there were expulsions of some Spanish kingdoms. This is a little fuzzy. I believe Castile expelled the Jews. They would just have to go live in another one of the Spanish kingdoms. But this was sort of the final operation. Was we're going to expel them from all the Spanish kingdoms. There will be no more Jews in Spain.
So it wasn't just Granada. It was Seville. It was Castile. It was wherever you're gone. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's. Tell us a bit about. You're following the fortunes of one family. Tell us a little bit about that family and what they're for, and the beginning of this whole story.
Sure. So the main character of South of Sepharad, his name is Vidal. He is a Jewish physician and father of four, or father of five if you were to count a daughter of his that died when she was 3 years old. And Vidal is one of the most respected physicians in Granada, and he has a wife who's at home helping raise his kids. He also has his oldest child and oldest daughter. She's born. Her name is Goyo, but she converts to Catholicism to marry a Catholic and changes her name to Catalina. And this happens before the Alhambra Decree, a few years before. So she does this out of love and wanting to marry this man. On top of that, Vidal has 3 other children. His oldest son, Eliezer, is his physician's apprentice and will eventually take over the family business. He has 2 younger children, as well as a daughter who dies of a complicated disease when she's 3 years old.
He's got the 2 younger kids who, I guess the boy is, going to turn 13? Is that who it is? Is that the younger boy?
Right. His youngest son, Asher, is on the brink of turning 13 and having his bar mitzvah, but that's all put on hold when they need to leave Spain.
And how old is the daughter? He has another daughter who has helped. She's not a big part of the book, but there was another child. How old was she?
Right. Emila's only supposed to be 10 years old in the book.
Okay. All right. I thought she was younger, the youngest one that was surviving. What makes this book powerful is that you begin with a burial. I mean, we start out with a burial. Tell us about that burial, the daughter Sarah, and how this is important to the story and the internment in the Jewish cemetery. How does this all play into this story?
So, yeah, the novel opens with Sarah, the youngest daughter, her burial. And in this moment, this is the one scene that takes place in 1488. And in this moment, it's a Jewish cemetery in Granada, but they're also the Christian community and the Muslim community is also invited. And they all bury this young girl together. And there's no division among religions as there's going to be throughout the rest of the novel. Now, I don't want to go so far to say that relationships between these 3 different religions were always positive leading up to 1492. There's tons of instances of these different religions fighting and warring against each other.
They lived together. And that's the whole thing. They were able to, even though they had their battles and fight, they were still able to live together. They were buried together, and there's some degree of coexistence. But that's very important. And then that becomes a big part later on in the book, because some things are going to happen once Ferdinand and Isabella take power and take control. And next thing you know, something's happening to the cemetery. Could you tell us a little bit about what they did back then?
So what they did back then was once Spain and Granada became part of the Christian kingdom, it was time to get rid of everything that was Jewish. This is we're talking 1492 purposes. We're only going to talk about getting rid of the Jewish things. They did this as well with Muslim architecture and Muslim locations a few years later. But one of the things they did was get rid of the Jewish cemetery and basically raise it and pave over it to make it into something else, whether it would be a plaza or a church or what have you. And this becomes a major issue for Catalina, who's the daughter that stayed behind as a Catholic, because before her parents leave, her mother asks her, please take care of your youngest sister's grave. Please watch over her. So while Catalina is trying to make good on this promise she made to her mother, really the last promise she would ever make to her, she's seeing the destruction of the Jewish community left behind before her eyes.
And this happened to all the relatives who were buried in the cemetery. They all got, who knows what happened to the bones or how they got moved and everything. But so she becomes sort of the flashpoint, the symbol of the whole situation. Well, that brings me to Catalina. Now, she marries a gentleman. You said she married a Catholic gentleman, I think. And she converted. Okay. So now what did that entail? Do you have any knowledge of what the conversion entailed back then?
It seems that it was a relatively simple thing to do. To convert, you would go to the church and do the necessary prayers. And it was not a complicated or prolonged thing. They wanted people converted. So even later in the book, when Vidal is tempted to convert, the priest that he meets says that it would be very easy. They're not going to charge you for it, because the church really wanted to increase its numbers. So when she's able to convert for marriage, it's quite a simple thing for her to be able to do.
Okay. All right. And they wanted any Jew who wanted to was going to be free in that 3-month period of time to convert, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. During that 3-month period of time, that window before the Alhambra Decree went into effect, they could either convert or they could leave and never come back.
So they wanted them to become Christian, and then they wanted the Inquisition to take place. Now, this makes it very difficult if you're what you call like a converso. If you're a conversion, I mean, what are you supposed to do? How do they? I don't get that. Those are two polar opposite things. We want you, and we're trying to get rid of you too. Difficult.
Well, absolutely, and it was such a horrible trick that Isabel and Ferdinand and the Spanish Inquisition played on the conversos, which is that they said if you convert, you'll be Catholic, you'll get to stay here, you'll have all the rights of a first-class citizen in our new empire. But then, pretty much immediately, they became suspicious of the idea of whether or not people were actually converting and were going to be Catholic, or whether or not they were just going to practice their Judaism in private. And the Alhambra Decree actually outlines this as one of the motivations for even being drafted in the first place. This is in the decree that they believe that Jews are converting falsely and still practicing in private. They accuse Jews of even trying to convert others to Judaism in private. So the Spanish Inquisition comes along to root out anyone who is converted falsely. And the Spanish Inquisition continued to the 1800s. And this becomes a massive problem because the Inquisition is suspicious of everybody. You could be accused by your neighbor. You can be, you'll never find out who accused you. So it becomes a very large problem that basically leaves Spain and the converted Jews in a state of paranoia for centuries.
No doubt about that. It was unbelievable. As I was reading that, they want you to do it, and then they want to have the Inquisition come in. We'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, let's tell us a little bit about. Okay, we told 3 months to go. What do they have to do, and what was the trek they were going to go on? What was the everything leading to their leaving Spain?
So it would be different for every Jewish population, depending on what part of Spain they were located in. But in south of Sepharad, they are in Granada, and one of the closest main ports from Granada is Malaga, which is on the southern coast of Spain. And so the idea that the Granada community has is they're going to pack whatever belongings they can in their horse and wagons, take it to the coast of Malaga, and then sail across the Mediterranean into what was then called the Maghreb, which we now know as Morocco. And their plan is to go to the city of Fez, where a rabbi in Granada, his brother, lives, and the idea is that Jewish community will take them in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they had to travel from Granada down to the port. And how long was that? Is it a long journey? I'm assuming it took a while.
Well, so actually, it's not a long journey at all. If you were to look at it, it's only about 80 miles. So for us, if we were to take nowadays, if we were to take a car there, it might only take an hour and a half. But for the situation with the Jews of Granada, there's 200 of them. They're all pushing, they're all taking wagons. They're going through the mountains. It's a very mountainous pathway. So what seems like a very short journey actually takes about 3 weeks in the novel to get people there, just because you're dealing with children, elderly, not enough food, not enough water. It becomes a very challenging expedition, even though it's relatively not that far away.
Yeah. Well, and you have to consider, as Eric writes so well in the book, you have to consider they had to get rid of all their assets. You couldn't take everything with you, from all your cooking items or your even mementos. You couldn't carry anything with you. You had to buy transportation. Not everybody had a cart and wagon and cows in the middle of Granada. And so that took time. Then you have to get there, and then you got to leave. I mean, once you get down to the coast, you still got to get out of there. You can't stick around. So it was a tight deadline, really, 3 months. So that was something. Now, Vidal is the family patriarch. He seems to make a lot of decisions that nobody likes. I don't know if it's was that on purpose? Was he playing devil's advocate all the time, or what was his situation?
It was on purpose. So it sort of was the way the character came out. So I didn't do a ton of outlining for the book before I started. I really wanted the characters to carry the story in whatever way they saw fit. And when I realized, again, because I work with doctors also, so I know a little bit about the doctor mindset. And I realized quickly that if Vidal is a doctor, if he's on this journey with 200 other people and they're facing all these situations, he's not just going to be able to be at his own wagon and take care of his own family and not worry about how everyone else is. He's going to have to go and be a doctor and help people. So his sort of duty to being a doctor comes at odds of helping his family, especially when his wife and children really need him. On top of that, he also is deciding that the best course of action is to remain Jewish and not convert. And some of his family have issues with this. They think that he's making things more complicated and putting his family in unnecessary danger because he wants to remain Jewish, when it seems that converting so you could stay at home in Granada would be the more safer solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, that's one of the decisions. We have an engagement that he breaks off because of certain things, and he won't let one child do certain things, go around with him. And I mean, it's just everything he was saying. He's getting a lot of grief and aggravation from his family, but he was steadfast in what he believed in and where he wanted to go. And that was shown very brightly throughout this book. And that was very good. Yeah, I like that a lot. But in the long run, they all sort of agree, yeah, because you did the right thing, Dad. Yeah, that's what they had. Now, Catalina, in a way, reminds me of her father. She wasn't going to, like you said, her mother begged her to go. Her father begged her to go. Everybody's begging her to come along with us. They don't trust the Spanish. But she's sort of like her dad, isn't she? She's sort of, I'm headstrong. I'm going to do it my way. And she stuck around.
I sort of see her as a more naive version of her father, which is that she has this same sort of principles and code that Vidal has, and that I'm going to stick to my sense of duty. Also, I think when I was writing Catalina, I had to remind myself that she only knows what she knows in 1492. She doesn't have the 2020 hindsight that we have for the situation. And while she knows that it could be dangerous to stay, she's not really thinking that anything that bad is going to happen to her, or that, possible execution could be on the line. She doesn't really know what to think. She assumes that her in-laws will protect her and that she's going to be okay. And it's only because we know how awful the Spanish Inquisition was that we know to fear for her in a way that she is not aware to fear for herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She even tries to make friends with one of the priests who were part of the Inquisition, which was interesting. I'd hoped that was going to go one way. It obviously didn't go the way I was hoping. That's part of the story. But now they eventually bring her in. They bring her in as part of the Inquisition. They drag her in the middle of the night, bring her in, and that had to be a hard thing to write. Forget about living that life, but you had to have a hard thing to write about that.
It actually was hard to write about. So I was able to get a lot of good research about the Inquisition, so I was able to write the scene where she's basically taken before an Inquisition tribunal as accurately as I felt that I could. And I've never been one of those writers who, I've heard a lot of writers say this, like if they need to write about a character in a really bad situation, that it could take a lot out of them, or that or that it even can make them depressed. I've never felt that way. I've always been able to sort of see my characters as fictional characters. But something about writing those chapters for Catalina was very challenging. And I remember it was hard for me to pick up the novel and finish it for a little while after that. So it took me by surprise that I had this reaction to it.
Well, and I think that we can tell that, Eric, because we never get the exact ending of, we know it's implied what happens to Catalina, but you don't come out and give us all the gory details. Let's put it that way. But, this is the thing. My wondering is, and I guess they don't have statistics from back that time, but were any conversos able to survive the Inquisition? I mean, I don't know how you could survive it if they questioned everything you did.
Actually, this was one of the most surprising things I ever found in my research. I always assumed that prior to writing this novel that the Inquisition was basically a mock trial before they whisked you off to execution. And it turned out that there were ways out of it. And I actually think historians will argue about this widely, but it's completely possible that not nearly as many people were actually executed under the Inquisition than we might think. So just to explain how you could get out of this alive, if you were brought before a tribunal, your best option was to say that, like, say you made a mistake, I accidentally lit a candle on Friday night, or I didn't work on Saturday because I was sick or something, and try to talk your way out of it and explain how devout you are. If they believed you, then you would be lucky and you'd be able to go. If they didn't believe you, they would try to torture you and get you to confess that you had strayed from the religious faith. And if you confessed quickly enough, they would allow you to live, but in great shame. They would force you to wear what's called a San Benito, which is basically like, think of it like a medieval dunce cap and a, I guess you call it like a shawl or a vest that depicted flames on it. It was basically meant to embarrass you and make you a pariah from the community, that saying that, like, that basically saying you're a liar and you don't truly believe in Christ and things like that. But if you resisted, or they were still skeptical of the idea that you could be saved, you had two other options, and these both resulted in death. You would basically imprisoned until the next, it's called an auto de fe, which is where they would have these mass executions of people. And if you confessed at the auto de fe, they would, sorry if this is getting a little, this might get a little gory.
It's a great history. I love it.
Okay, this might get a little gory, but if you confessed at the auto de fe, the more attractive option was that someone would strangle you to death. But if you refused to confess and you stayed Jewish or Muslim all the way to the end, that's how they burned you at the stake. And I think the burning at the stake that's what I knew about going into it. I think that's what most readers will know going into it.
But there was another way out. Okay. Well, another way to die. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Now, one of the things that I found fascinating was that her father-in-law, who was a Catholic, was also brought in and basically tortured, I think. And whatever happened to him? And tell us a little bit about that situation.
Oh, that's actually not her father-in-law. That's Beatrice's father.
Okay.
Yeah, but her father-in-law, Kelly's father-in-law Ochoa, also is punished for having taken in this woman who's seen as converting falsely. Basically, and this was common once the prisoner was taken in by the Inquisition and tortured and possibly executed, the Inquisition would send the bill to the family, and the family would have to pay for all of it. They couldn't afford it. They would lose all their assets, and also they would again be a pariah from the community because they're seen as basically harboring an enemy. So what happens to this basically happens to her father-in-law. His reputation is completely ruined, and he needs to figure out how to start over.
Okay, wow, that's even lifelong Catholics were suffering under this situation. Unbelievable. Now, we talked about the escape route, the terrain, and it was because they were. Was there deserts here because they were running out of water at some point in time? Did they have to go through a desert?
Spain shares a very similar climate, actually, to California. So what they're walking through is they're walking through mountains that are basically dry. It's the summer. It's a very sparse land. If they were to go in the winter, there would be snow. So it could be very different. Yeah, but they're walking through a very hot summer climate where there's not a lot around for them to find access to water or plants to eat and things like that.
Okay. All right. We're going to skip over the trip because there's so much in there, but I want to get down to the question about Vidal. Is this a family situation? Now, he was a physician. His kids are training to be physicians. His daughter, who's still alive, was sort of helping as a nurse, doing things. Was that traditional that it was in the family? Okay, that would be a family of physicians. We have a family of rabbis, a family of merchants. Is that how that went?
I would say it wasn't necessarily across the board that was always the case, but I think it was quite common. Family businesses in general were very common back then because you would act as an apprentice under your parents and then you would take over the business. And with Jews in Spain, they weren't able to hold any sort of job they wanted. And physician was one of the more higher up and more respected jobs that a Jewish person could have. So it makes sense that someone who would be a physician would want their children to be physicians also.
and they never wanted to ask for money. Never gave bills. It was a tough time. Now they got down. They finally make it down to the coast, and they have to find boats. And again, we're back in what he's going to do to find a boat, and that's another situation I don't want to get into. I don't want to give away the whole plot of this book here, some of the points of it. How long is that trip from the coast down to Morocco, or whatever it was called, Maghreb back then?
Oh, yeah. So from the coast of Spain to the coast of the Maghreb?
Yeah.
I actually did all the calculations on this. I don't have them in front of me. I actually had to calculate how far it was as the crow flies, in addition to how fast these ships moved. And I came to the realization that it would take a little over 24 hours.
Oh, not too far then. Okay.
Not too far at all. It's not a long journey. It could be a very dangerous journey, because the Mediterranean can be unpredictable, but also because, and this is spoken about a little bit in the novel, spoken about but not depicted, is the idea that sometimes there was this idea that the sailors had who were taking the Jews, that the Jews were hiding money or had even eaten their money to get back later. So there are these stories of people being robbed, thrown overboard, or even having their stomachs slit open because they were trying to find the gold inside. So it was a short journey, but a very dangerous journey.
That's amazing. It was. Yeah, it's not too bad. The thing when they saw the ocean, they had no idea. They because being from Granada, they were out in the mountains. They never saw the ocean in their life, and they couldn't believe what this was. And it looked like it went on forever, obviously. So, wow, that was very good. They get over there to Africa, and they make it down to Fez. Okay, and they're sort of welcomed in Fez. They become part of it. How are they still there? I mean, how long has the Jewish population been there? Have they been here continuously since 1492, or are they no longer there?
That's a great question, and it's actually a very long answer. So the short answer is yes, there's still a Jewish population in Fez and Morocco. As far as I can tell, Morocco seems to be the Arab nation that is most interested in keeping its Jews and even trying to repatriate them, like trying to get more people who have immigrated away from Morocco to come back. But over time, the population dwindled. There was issues between the Jews who were from Morocco taking in the Jews who were from Spain, later on taking in Jews who had converted and then decided to leave. And over time, there were different reasons that either the royalty would protect them or the people of Morocco would try to fight them or incite violence. And then over time, many, especially in the 20th century, many Jews started to emigrate away. But there is still a population of Jews in Morocco.
Now, we could keep talking. Obviously, a lot more we could talk about. But, you got to get to work. And people want to know what's coming up next from Eric Weintraub. Where's the next book coming? And I'm seeing a family saga here. I'm seeing a family saga.
Well, thank you for saying that about the family saga. And that to me is such a big compliment that, after spending 300 plus pages with these characters, that you'd be interested in spending more time with them. I really love that. Right now, my next book that I'm working on, I'm on the second draft of it. And it's actually a contemporary day story set in Los Angeles. I wanted to do something a little different for my next book. But I absolutely have ideas for more historical fiction novels. There was even while I was researching this topic of the expulsion, there was a lot of stories I found out about Spain prior to the Inquisition that I found very fascinating, and prominent Jewish figures who lived in Spain or were from Spain that I'd love to write novels about at some point. For the time being, I don't know if we'll see any more of Vidal and his family, but I'll never say never. If a good idea comes along and it seems worth pursuing, I would, of course, pursue it.
You got that next generation. You got the two boys there. And then you got the little grandson. I can see a lot going on here, I'll tell you. But, hey, listen, I look forward to your contemporary works, too, I'll tell you. It's good stuff. And, one of the things, I think that if I'm not mistaken, I got the book here in front of me. I want to make sure I'm positive about this. But one of the things I think at the back of this is a list of some of your, where you find some information on other books and other writers and things like that. There are a few people out there who have been writing books on this. What other books, some other writers could you recommend people to if they're interested in this?
So there's a few people. I think if you wanted a a really good nonfiction book about it that is loaded with details, I would recommend History of a Tragedy by, oh boy, what's his last name? Oh, I would recommend History of a Tragedy by Joseph Perez. Great Spanish historian. And that was actually the first book, one of the first books that I found on this topic that really helped open up the story to me. If you're looking for more fiction on the topic, I'd say the other novel that I feel is the closest to mine is a book called The Last Jew by Noah Gordon. And The Last Jew is actually also, this is pure coincidence, it's also about a Jewish physician, but he is a Jewish physician that converts to Christianity early on in because of the Alhambra Decree, and it's about his journeys in Spain as a converso.
And I know that Eric and I both like Noah Gordon. One of his best books is The Physician. I love that book. I tell you, great book. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. If you're interested, and Eric, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I want to say thank you for being with us today on Books and Looks.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, friends, we'll be back in just a moment. Well, thank you so very much, Eric. Very good interview. I enjoyed listening to you and learning a lot from your book, as well as from this interview. You know, friends, if you wish to read more about the books, you can get my reviews on viewsonbooks.com. And you can also, look at the reviews that come out on Goodreads or NetGalley or wherever you get your reviews. But this is a good book. I think I really enjoy it. It's a great way to start 2024, in my opinion. So anyway, I just want to simply say, well, Blaine, what are you looking at? I'm not going to be doing looks every week, but right now I just want to say things I'm looking at. What do I see in the trends in books? Greek islands. A lot of new books about Greek islands. That's there. Dual timelines. We're seeing a lot about dual timelines this year. Yep. One's maybe starting in 1500 and the other one modern day. So we're seeing a lot of dual timeline books. So that's what's out there. And that's what I'm looking at, all different types of books that you might very well enjoy. So anyway, on behalf of viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of the good folks at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks saying, may all your leaves be pages in a book.